you getting tired of all these videos, all referring to the Qiraat and the Ahruf and the Razm and all these words that you probably don't know and many of you probably don't care about, and yet they are important. And I won't be doing too many more on the Qiraat and the Ahruf back here in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. I would really like to get to the 7th and early 8th century. I'd like to get to the manuscripts. So bear with me, because we do still want to talk about one more thing. And this is pretty important. And it has to do with how many Qira'at there are today that are recognized, that are authoritative, and also when they were written. Because this is what Muslims aren't telling you. This is what the Shabir Ali and Yasir Qadhi, they are not saying, and they don't want to say it. You can see why, and I think we need to say it, because this is in some ways, this is the lie of Islam, that it refers to all these different readings, it refers to all these different dialects, and it assumes that all these existed at the time of Muhammad, that they were all there at the time of Muhammad. So I'm just going to play a few clips, starting with Dr. Shabir Ali. And it's a clip from earlier this week that the interview that I had done earlier, but that he had just recorded at the beginning of this week with this Kenny Bomer is his name. So let's watch this clip and see what Dr. Shabir Ali says about the Qiraat.
Brother Kenny, I just want to add something to what you said. It is important that we get the nuances right. Otherwise, people may find an avenue through which they can start driving a wedge. Yeah. The way I would like to say this is to say that among the various recitations and even in the manuscripts that we're finding, certainly there are variations from, let's stick with the recitations for a moment. So we have 10 different recitations which are approved by Muslim scholars. They say that these are fine to be recited in the prayers. Whichever one of them you recite, your prayers are valid, but don't go outside of these 10. There are another 4 which can be used in the further elaboration of the Quran in tafsir, but you wouldn't recite them in the prayers. And this has to do with the level of clarity and assurance that we have in the transmission of the 10 versus the additional 4. But all of these basically fit on the basic ductus, the consonantal ductus that we know to be the Uthmanic text.
Okay, so it's pretty clear as far as Dr. Shabir Ali, from his position at least, it's very clear that there are 10. 10. What exactly are these 10? As we're going to find later on with Yasir Qadhi, it's 7 plus 3 to make the 10. He does talk about another 4, but no one really refers to that other 4 because they are part of the tafsir. So he then comes back, no, it's these 10. You notice that? Only 10. He's not telling you what those 10 are. All right, you notice that. We're going to come back to that. Let's go over to Yasir Qadhi now and see what he says, because he's going to be referring also to which is the most important, the one that we use today, all right? So let's hear what Yasir Qadhi says.
The number of verses in the Quran depends upon the recitation, called in Arabic the qira'ah that you are reciting. Now the most common qira'ah that people who are living in English-speaking lands in Western countries, most of the world that follows, it is called the qira'ah of Hafs and Asim. And this qira'ah of Hafs and Asim, it has 6,236 verses in the Quran. So 6,236 verses according to the qira'ah that we recite. And the other recitations, and there are 10 total recitations, they have slightly different numbers, between 6,210 all the way up to 6,236. So a difference of 20 or 30 verses. That's it. Now,
okay, did you catch that? Did you pick that up? He said very clear that there are 10 recitations. These are the only ones, the 10 recitations. But the most important one is Hafs from Asim. Hafs, comes from Asim. And you'll see that both Asim, who is the reader, and Hafs is the transmitter, are both from Kufa. He didn't mention that. But this is the one that is used in the English-speaking world, he said, and of course, actually, it's the one that's being used all over the world since 1985, because it has now become the canonical text because of King Fahd in 1985, 35 years ago. But did you pick that up, okay? Now, let's move on, because he's going to say more. Let's see what else he says.
So, when the revelation of the Qur'an started upon the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easier for his ummah to memorize the Qur'an by allowing it to be recited in these various dialects. And the evidence for this is a hadith narrated in Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Muslim Imam Ahmad, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel came to me and recited the Qur'an in one manner. And he used the Arabic word, one harf. And I recited it back to him. But I asked him to increase the number of harf until he offered me 2, 3, 4, 5, until he said the Qur'an had been revealed in 7 ahruf, 7 ways of reciting, so all of them are the same in meaning. They do not change the meaning, but they change in pronunciation and in the finer details. Now, so these are the 7 ahruf. They're exactly 7 ahruf that Allah Azza wa Jal allowed the Qur'an to be recited in, based upon the dialects, the famous 7 dialects of the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay, so that's pretty clear now that it is 7 different ways of reciting it, and these were actually given by Jibril. And in fact, it was on the insistence of Muhammad himself. So this is all happening. These 7 are all happening while Muhammad is living, because this is going on while Muhammad, it is between Muhammad and Jibril that this conversation is going on. Are you picking that up? So now we have the 7. These are the original 7. These are the original, or the most important 7 that we now are being shown as existing at the time of Muhammad. So that means before 632 when he dies. Let's go on. Hold on to that thought.
That some of these different younger students met up, for example, in Azerbaijan, on the Muslim battlefield, the front lines of the Muslim border. And one of them is reciting according to Ibn Mas'ud, the other one is reciting according to Zayd ibn Thabit, and they don't know that the Qur'an has been revealed in different recitations. And so they began fighting one another. They began accusing the other one of falling into error. And that is why Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman went back to Medina, and he said, "O Uthman ibn Affan, you have to combine the ummah on one mushaf, on one recitation, such that all of these other differences are gotten rid of." And so Uthman ibn Affan combined the ummah upon the recitation of the Qurayshi dialect. It was the Qurayshi dialect, and all of the other recitations and versions were gotten rid of.
Okay, so fascinating. We're getting a bit more now. Yasir Qadhi is talking about how the Mecca and the Medinans, they went up to the north to fight against the Azerbaijanis. And there they came into contact with the Iraqis and also the Syrians, the people from Shams. And they were all fighting together against the Azerbaijanis. But those from Mecca and Medina were hearing the Quran recited in different dialects. And they saw that this was not the same Quran that they were reciting. And so Hudayfa, who was there in that battle at Azerbaijan, comes back down to Medina, according to Yasir Qadhi, which is really what you read right here. This is straight out of Al-Bukhari, volume 6, Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 510. So he comes back to Medina, and he insists that Uthman write the Quran in the Qurayshi dialect, not in these other dialects. So is this Qurayshi the only one, or some the dialects that are in Syria and Iraq, are they part of the 7 now, or should they be thrown out because they were not accepted by Uthman and they weren't accepted by Hudayfa? What's fascinating, it seems to suggest that, because did you see what Qadhi then said at the very end? Any of the others, all the other dialects, were then destroyed. And we do know that. That's right here too. They were burnt. They were burnt. It says so right there in black and white. All of the other manuscripts, whether they were fragmentary or whole copies, he demanded that they be burnt. So that's the other dialects, right, that don't agree with the Qurayshi dialect. And Yasir Qadhi suggests that. But then he seems to talk about more dialects that come in later on. Let's hear what he says next.
Tribes. And these differences began to be recorded by later scholars. And these differences were then ascribed to the people who became famous for them. So these differences were named after specific people. And these people were the ones who became famous for their particular recitation, until finally the codification of these recitations occurred, and this was done in the 2nd and 3rd century of the Hijrah, and these recitations are known in Arabic as the qira'at. The qira'at are not the same as the 7 ahruf. I'll give you a very simple analogy here, which will help you understand what the difference is between the ahruf and the qira'at. The ahruf are what Allah Azza wa Jal revealed divinely. If you jumble up all the ahruf together, and then you spread them and let every person recite according to one of these recitations, according to some mixture of these recitations, these become the qira'at. And the qira'at are named after specific people who specialized in them. And finally, as we said, in the 2nd and 3rd century of the Hijrah, these qira'at were standardized, they were codified. And exactly 10 qira'at were chosen by our Muslim scholars. 10 of them were chosen because they represented the cream of the crop. They represented the best of the best. In each city, primarily 1 or 2 major qadis were chosen. So for example, in the city of Medina, there was the most famous qadi, and his name was Nafi'. And Nafi' was chosen to represent Medina. And in Mecca, there was a famous qadi by the name of Ibn Kathir. Don't get confused with the one who wrote the tafsir. The one who wrote the tafsir lived 500 years later. This is another Ibn Kathir. And so Ibn Kathir al-Makki became another qira'ah. Likewise in Basra and in Kufa and in other places, every one of these places, they standardized certain scholars to become the leaders of the qira'at. And to this day, these qira'at are present in the ummah. Now,
Whoa, wow. So he said quite a bit there. I don't know if you picked up all that. Did you notice? He said that that they had to, later on, after they have already destroyed the ones that were corrupted, the ones that did not agree with the Qurayshi one, and that's why the Qurayshi was the one that was given as the final text and was sent to different readers to 5 different cities, as he's going to say. And the cities are Medina, Mecca, Basra, Baghdad, and Damascus. Those are the 5 cities. They were sent with reciters were given to each one of these master copies to each one of these 5 cities. But then he says later on, there was different reciters. There were differences that started to be inculcated again. And then he gave a definition for the ahruf in the qira'at. And these ahruf were these original 7. These are the pure 7 that were there. But later on, in the 2nd and 3rd century, as he says, they were then jumbled up. They were jumbled up. And that's how you then get, I'm assuming, the 10. Or was it the original 7? Where did the 10 come from? Are you starting to get confused? It seems like he said, hold on a minute, there were 7 that Jibril gave to Muhammad there during his lifetime, because Muhammad had asked for it. Those were the 7, okay, I get that. And then he says, when they had this battle up in Azerbaijan, they then had to bring it down to 1. Okay, so they brought that down to the Qurayshi dialect, and that became the master copy. Those were sent to 5 different cities, with a reader for each one. But then later on, there was some more recitations, differences that came in. So these are not the ones that Muhammad knew. These are not the ones that Jibril had given. These are not of the pure ones. These are different ones that came in. And the reciters were then created in the 2nd, 3rd century. And at that time then, they became codified at a later date. Who codified them? Was it Muhammad? No, wait a minute. This is 2nd, 3rd century. Muhammad's no longer living here. So who codified these other ones that came in? And where are they? And what are they? And who are they written by? You'd like to know, wouldn't you? It's getting pretty juicy now. And these later ones are all jumbled from the original ahruf, or the original 7. Why in the world did they have to destroy the ones that were there at the time of Uthman if now you're going to just get new ones that come in later on in the 2nd, 3rd century? Hugely significant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and play one more little clip here. I'm just going to give one more clip, and then we're going to actually put this together, and we're going to show you a timeline. And then we're going to go and show you what exactly did happen, what history now shows us. And you're going to see that Qadi and Shabir Ali, they're not telling you the whole truth. They're not giving you exactly what happened. And to understand what really happened, you need to look at the timeline. But let me just do this one little bit with Qadi first before I go on.
Of Medina. Most of the world has the qira'ah of the people of Iraq, which is Hafs and Asim al-Kufi, the people of Kufa. And this is what I assume most of my viewership will also know. They will be familiar with the recitation of Hafs and Asim, and this is the recitation that is prevalent in over 90% of the Muslim Ummah.
So before I go into my my timeline, I just wanted to give you that last bit. What is the name of the one he says that most of the people use today? And he ends with this. What does he say it is? It's the Hafs from Asim, from the line of Asim, which is from Kufa. Most of the people use that. Hold that, listen to that, because I'm going to come back to that, because that's enormously significant in this whole panoply of different qira'at, of different recitations, of different everything that's going on. You're going to see this is hugely significant. Okay, let's then go and look at this timeline.
It's important that we look at a timeline. It's important that we look and see exactly when these qira'at, these different variants, these different Qurans are put together. You're looking at a picture here of Hatun Tash's 37 Arabic Qurans. These are the 37 that she has now. These are the ones she's procured. Oh, in the last 6 years, 7 years. When we introduced this down at Speaker's Corner in 2016, she only had 26. She's found another 11. But there really should be only 30 of them. What do I mean by that? Well, if you were to go up on Wikipedia, as I said earlier, you will look and you will see these 30. On the left side, you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are the initial 7. Those are the 7 that Yasir Qadi is talking about, and that's the ones that he's referring to as the ones that existed at the time of Muhammad that were introduced by Jibril. And you can see the dates on them. Nafi from Medina died in 785. Ibn Kathir from Mecca died in 738. Abu Amr ibn al-Ala died in 770 from Basra. Ibn Amir al-Dimashqi from Damascus died in 736. Asim ibn Abi al-Jud from Kufa died in 745. And Hamza al-Zayyat from Kufa died in 772. The last then would be al-Kisa'i from Kufa, died in 805. Now, have you noticed I've been giving you the dates for a reason? Those are the initial 7. And who is the one that chose them? Well, his name is Ibn Mujahid. His name's right underneath. You can see his name right there. Died in 936. But then another 3 were added. Those are below that, 8, 9, and 10. Abu Ja'far from Medina, 748. Yaqub al-Yamani from Basra, 821. And Khalaf from Kufa, 844. Chosen by whom? Al-Jazari, who died in 1429. Now, to really understand all this, you're going to really have to put this on a timeline, because those are the 10 that they have been talking about. That's the 10 that Shabid Ali's talking about. This is the 10 that Yasir Qadi's talking about, the initial 7. They added 3 after that. But the ones that are more important, really, because there's 2 other lists there. Do you notice those 2 other lists? Those are the transmitters. And those transmitters are 2 students each for each one of the 10 readers. The 10 initial readers, the 10 most important readers, each had 2 students. They weren't really students. They were ones that just came after their tradition. And most of them didn't know them, because look at the dates. You can see the dates are much too late. But to really understand what I'm saying here, to really understand the problems that Muslims, and certainly Yasir Qadis and the Shabir Alis, are not telling you about, let's look at a timeline. So let's look at this timeline and let's take and see what we can find here. Because we want to look where this guy comes from, where this guy that I just circled in black. Here's a timeline. And this is a timeline that we're going to look at the 10 official qira'at. These are the 10 official recitations or dialects, depending on who's defining it. On the left, you will see Muhammad. He dies in 632. So I've got him on the far left there. He was receiving his revelation from 610 to 632. That's the year he died. And then you can see 652 there on the left, and that's where the Quran was compiled. 652, mid-7th century. But according to everything we've just been hearing, or according to everything that Yasir Qadhi is saying, the 7 qira'at were introduced here, the 7 readings, the 7 qira'at. It was Jibril who is the one that actually gave him the 7 readings. Remember, it was Jibril who Muhammad turned to. He says, I want my people to learn it in their own dialect, as there's so many dialects. Could you please not just have one? Could you have many more? And so that's why he gave them the 7 readings at that time, recognized by Muhammad. So these readings have to be there in 632. And that's the implication you're hearing whenever Yasir Qadhi or Shabirati are talking about these readings, these qira'at, that these were all done at the time of Muhammad, and therefore would have all been canonized and finished by the time he died in 632, right? But take a look at those 7 readings that we just saw listed before, the 7 actual reading that the Muslims are looking at. These are the 7 readings here. Take a look at that. There are the 7 readers in green. Ibn Amir from Damascus, 736. I put it in the order of when they died. Now, to be fair, they could have, and very likely, they did their writings, they wrote down their Qurans within 20 years, possibly the last 20 years of their life. So if you're looking at Ibn Amir from Damascus, though he died in 736, he probably started his writings in 716, so the first 20 years, or the last 20 years of his life. And so I put them in the order because he would be the earliest, since he died in 736. After him comes Ibn Kathir from Mecca, 738. Asim ibn Abi al-Najud, 745. Abu Amr ibn al-Ala from Basra, 770, and on down to Hamza, Nafi, and al-Kisai. So there you can see the 7 readers. They are not over in the left where Muhammad dies. They're actually a good 100 years after that. Do you see that? Look at the dates. The dates that they did their writing were all in the 8th century. Muhammad died in 632. The earliest one, Ibn Amir from Damascus, the earliest one dies in 736. That's 100 years later. That is not in the century that Muhammad lived. And all of them come after Ibn Amir. Ibn Kathir, 738, Asim, 745, Abu Amr, 770, Hamza, 772, Nafi, 785, Al-Kisai, 805. That's the 9th century. So we're talking about 150 years later. So none of these readers were living at the time of Muhammad. None of them were even doing their work in the same century Muhammad lived. So how could these be the 7 readings that Muslims are all telling about? How could these guys be there at the time that Muhammad was living or the time he died? These cannot be the same 7 readers. More than that, who is the one that codifies it? Remember, they kept on talking about the scholar who codifies these 7. What's his name? Well, here he is, Ibn Mujahid. But look when he dies. He dies in 936. 936. Take a look at that. That's the 10th century. That's 300 years after Muhammad. He is the one that chose those 7. And whenever you hear Shabirati or Yasir Qadhi talking about these 7, they're always referring them as if they're the companions. They were right there when Muhammad was living. No, they were not. They're living over 100 years later. And the guy that actually chooses them, it makes them, it canonizes them, is Ibn Mujahid from the 10th century. He is 300 years after Muhammad. He never knew Muhammad, never lived in that century. And then what about the 3 that come after? Well, here are the 3 that come after. Abu Jafar from Medina, 748. Yaqub al-Yamani from Basra, 821. Khalaf from Kufa, 844. They're the 3 in red. Look at their dates. They're also the 8th and 9th century. A good 100, in some cases, in this case, 200 years after Muhammad. So these 3 could certainly not have known Muhammad, and they could not have been doing their recitations and their writing while Muhammad was living. Muhammad would have not been around to canonize them and to solidify them and to recognize them. And they certainly did not come from Jibril. So these were written long after Muhammad. But notice what's missing in these 7 plus 3, which makes 10. Ibn Amir, Ibn Kathir, Asim, Abu Amr, Hamza, Nafi, Al-Kisai, Abu Jafar, Yaqub al-Yamani, Khalaf. What's missing? Or who's missing? Well, the Quran that we're all using today is missing. The guy that we all use, that, remember, Yasser Qadi said that 90% of the Muslim world now uses this official text, the text that was made official by King Fahd there in 1985. And that text is the Hafs text. Where is Hafs' name there? You don't see Hafs' name anywhere there, do you? No, he's missing. He is not part of the original 10. He is not part of the official 10. He is not part of the canonical 10. The creme de la creme, as Yasser Qadi calls him. The creme de la creme of all the readers. He is not there. And if he is not there, then you can see there's a problem here. Because if he is not there, where is he? Well, let's take a look and see where he is. But before I do that, what about these three? Who chose these three after the 7? We know Ibn Mujahid chose the first 7. Who chose these three? Well, there he is, Al-Jazari. Look at his dates. 1429. 1429, folks. You're talking a good 700 years after Muhammad. He is the one that chooses the last 3. So finally, you have 10. You finally have 10. But I want to look for Hafs's. Where is Warsh? He is not in any of these lists. So where do these guys come from? Where do they come in? Well, take a look. Warsh, 812. Hafs, 796. But they're not part of the 10. What are they? They are part of the 20. There they are. They are part of the 20. These are the transmitters that I had on the graph that I showed you at the beginning. These are the 20 who each of which are 2 of which were belong to every one of the readers. Each of the readers had 2 students, though they didn't live at the same time. They may not have known them. And those 20, you see the 2 most important of the recitations, Warsh and Hafs. Warsh and Hafs from 812 and 796. 796 is the one that is used by 90% of the Muslim world today. Warsh is used all over North Africa. These guys did not know Muhammad. These guys never lived in the same century of Muhammad. And what's fascinating, when you look at the 30, that's the 30 now that you will notice that the Muslims all use. The one that is used today, Hafs, where does he come from? Because remember, we've been saying over and over again, and Yasser Qadi said this, he made this point very clear, when the Meccans and the Medinans, they went up to Azerbaijan to have that battle, and they came across these other Muslims that were up there who were from Shams, which would be Syria, and also from Iraq. And they listened to them reciting the Quran, and they noticed that this is not the same Quran. And Hudayfa comes back from that battle, and he tells Uthman, you must write it down in the Qurayshi dialect. The Qurayshi dialect. Why? Because this is the dialect that Muhammad would have spoken. This is the dialect from Mecca, Medina. And what did he do after he had Zayd ibn Thabit write it in the Qurayshi dialect and send it out to all the 5 cities? What did he do next? Well, he then destroyed all those other dialects. He destroyed any manuscript that was not the same as the Qurayshi dialect, including those from Kufa, including those from Basra, including those from Damascus, and certainly including anything that did not agree with the Qurayshi dialect. So if that is the case, then why is it that in 1924, the Quran that was chosen by Muhammad ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad there in Cairo, why is it that he chose the Hafs? Because Hafs is from Kufa. Hafs comes from Asim ibn Abi al-Najud from Kufa, he died in 745. Hafs died in 796. Can you then understand that this makes no sense? If the whole reason why Uthman canonized the Quran and put it into the Qurayshi dialect and then sent it to 5 different cities and sent a reader with them to all these 5 cities, Mecca, Medina, Basra, Baghdad, and Damascus. If that were the case there in 652, then why in 796 do you have Hafs coming up with his Quran? And then in 1924, when the committee that was led by Muhammad ibn al-Husayni al-Haddad chose a Kufic Quran, why didn't he choose one from Mecca like Ibn Kathir? Or why didn't he choose a Quran from Medina like Nafi? At least Warsh, that is used in North Africa, Warsh is one of the students of Nafi from Medina. That would have been Qurayshi. But no, 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 he chose us. And this is what they're not telling you. Take a look at that timeline there. Emblazon it into your head. Realize that whenever you hear about these qira'at, whenever you hear about these different dialects or these recitations, they are not from the century Muhammad came. They are not from even from the time period or anywhere near where Muhammad lived. They are from hundreds of years later, about 100 years to 200 to 300 years. Because if you go to the down at the bottom on the far right, you will see Idris 905. You will see Kulbul 904. That's the 10th century. These are 10th century recitations. These are 10th century qira'at and 9th. And folks, 8th century is already 100 years after Muhammad. 8th, 9th, and 10th. That's 100 to 200 to 300 years. The 30 are finally put together. This is as human a document as you can find. Can you then understand why we've been saying this is not from God? This has nothing to do with God. This has nothing to do with Allah. This has nothing to do with Muhammad. It doesn't even have anything to do with Uthman, because he was the one that compiled it in 652. None of these Qurans are from 652. They're from 100 to 200 to 300 years after the fact. I would love to see Yasser Qadi, and I would love to see Shabbat Ali explain this. Why haven't they really told us about this? Why haven't they said that the Quran that we have in our hand today, even the one that we're using today, was written in 796? Look at the timeline. Muhammad died in 632. That's 164 years later. 164 years later. Well, folks, I think I've said enough. We'll leave it there. This is Jay then. Over and out.